Good morning. It's a huge pleasure to be here, and I want to begin by thanking Henry Porter, The Observer and Open Democracy for organising this conversation. Whatever one thinks of Brexit, it's undeniably the case that it's reinvigorated democratic debate in this country. Participation in membership of all our political parties has risen, and events like these, which are occurring across the country, are a healthy part of making sure that our future destiny is decided by public conversation and debate. And I want to associate myself, perhaps for the first time, but I hope not for the last, with the point that Gillian Maughan made earlier, which is that wherever we come from on the political spectrum, we all benefit from hearing a different and divergent point of view, even if it's only to reinforce the passion with which we held our first view. But one thing I want to ask in this audience is for a little bit of help and audience participation. Now, some of you I know were too young to vote in the referendum. Others of you may not have been able to vote for whatever reason. But all those of you who did vote and voted to remain, can I invite you to put your hands up, please? Okay. Good. Thank you. All those of you who voted in the referendum and voted to leave, could I invite you to put your hands up, please? Well, to follow on from what Gillian said earlier, I may be in Methodist Central Hall and I may be about to preach, but it is not to the converted. I'm a big bad Brexiteer. Worse than that, in front of an audience composed of many Observer readers, I'm a Murdoch employee. Worse than that, I was a member of the Cameron government that brought you the great moving out of Europe show that was the referendum. So in speaking to you today, I'm conscious that I'm likely to be as out of step with the majority of you as an Orangeman in the Vatican at a papal mass. But in the tradition of the best of Protestant dissent, let me put forward a couple of views and then let me take some questions or listen to what you have to say, because the reason that I'm here is to both to share a perspective but also to issue an invitation. And this perspective I want to share is from someone who doesn't repent for a moment the actions that he took in the referendum and believes that Britain will be better off outside the European Union, but also someone who has many good friends, some of them still good friends, who voted to remain, and someone who admires many of the impulses which lay behind the passion with which the Remain cause was fought and the enthusiasm with which so many still uphold it. I think, and I'll be very interested in your perspective, that many of those who voted to remain weren't voting for economic reasons, though there were good economic arguments on either side. Many of the people who voted to remain were doing so because they had an idealistic attachment towards international cooperation, because they believed that the European Union embodied an ideal of democracy after a continent had been scarred by wars and totalitarianism, and that deep scar, that livid pain, needed to be healed by coming together. And I think there were also people, thank you, I think there were also people who voted to remain because they thought that the unity of our kingdom might be threatened by being outside the European Union, and they valued the strength that comes from all four constituent parts of the United Kingdom being together. And I think that noble attachment to the unity of the kingdom, that belief in democracy, that belief that international collaboration is a good thing, they are all noble aspirations. So why did I argue that we should leave? Well, actually, one of the questioners just before I came on put their finger on it. It's all about democracy. If we look at the history of the European Union, in its earlier stages, the European Union was integral in establishing democracy in authoritarian states like Spain and Portugal and Greece after the colonials. It was also instrumental in making sure that democracy took root in the countries of Eastern Europe after they escaped from the tyranny of communism. But my contention and fear is that the democracy which took root in those countries was not replicated in the institutions that governed Europe, and in particular, was not replicated in the way in which the single currency was managed and the economic policies that flowed from it were implemented. And if anyone wants to know from a completely different but utterly honest perspective about the damage that the single currency and European integration wrought, I can do no better than recommend that you read Yanis Varoufakis' latest book of memoirs. In it, He explains, someone who in his heart is a European and who never wanted Greece to live the single currency, he explains the evasion of responsibility on the part of Europe's elites when his country, the home of democracy, was suffering as a result of an unfair economic policy that imposed austerity on the poorest and resulted in a backlash which saw for the first time since 1945 Nazis in the Greek parliament. One of the problems with the European Union is that those at the top, Pace, AC Grayling's defence, are not democratically accountable or elected. The European Union has 5 presidents. None of them are democratically elected or accountable. The individuals who are responsible for the management of the single currency or for the adoption of Schengen are not people whom any of us ever elected or whom we could ever throw out. And that means that the European Union has a danger of becoming either corrupt or complacent because it's not accountable to the people. And the truth about our democracy, which of course developed in Greece, grew in Western Europe, and has now taken flower across the globe, is that democracy succeeds because you can transfer power peacefully through the exercise of a vote at a ballot box. And if we look at the history of democracy, democracy has generally, not always, been fostered and flowered within liberal nation states. So if one looks at the experience of the United Provinces, the Dutch Republic, when it seceded from Catholic Habsburg Europe, if one looks at the experience of Britain in the 17th century when we rejected the Ancien Régime, if you look at the experience of America in the 18th century when it got out from underneath the British Empire of that time, in each of those occasions, free citizens said we want to govern ourselves. We may be part of a larger unit which offers us prosperity and promises to shield us from the chill winds outside, but we would rather take control of our elected representatives, give them instructions, and when they get things wrong, change them. And it's been that principle of democratic accountability, which has powered progress throughout the ages. The United Provinces, in the time of the 16th century, was the home of free thinking when Catholic Habsburg Europe was the home of reaction. Britain, in the 17th century, through the example not just of the original parliamentarians, but also those who overthrew James II, Britain became the home and a beacon for liberty at that time. America, it's important that we remember that at this difficult time, America, in the 18th century, made the principles of representative democracy alive and exciting and resonant. And the vote to leave the European Union may have been driven by many factors amongst many people. But for me, it was primarily about making sure that whoever is in number 10 Downing Street, whoever exercises power over you, is someone that you can throw out. Because one of the problems with our being in the European Union was that there were all sorts of laws, whether it was VAT on tampons or where we build our houses, that were decided by European regulations and directives that we in Parliament couldn't reject and couldn't even amend. There are legitimate concerns that are sometimes raised about the way in which the executive steamrollers things through the House of Commons. Absolutely right, they should be raised. But one of the most effective ways in which any executive can steamroller things through the House of Commons is to have it agreed at a European level, in councils which are not transparent, where minutes are not recorded, where people are not held accountable, and if it's agreed at the European level, those people like me, who is currently running for election, and who can be thrown out of office if we get things wrong, we could not influence it. And that's why, having explained, I hope, some of the reasons why I voted as I did, I want to end by issuing an appeal. There'll be many people here who will deeply regret the decision that was made, want to revisit it, and as we heard in the debate on the second referendum, arguments will be run about what new form of democratic legitimacy may be required at some point in the future for the course the Prime Minister wants to take us on. I don't want to get involved in that debate unless you want to ask me about it. I have clear views, but I don't want to trouble you with them here. What I want to do is to issue an invitation about something else. It's overwhelmingly likely, the vote is clear, that Britain will leave the European Union. And as a result of leaving the European Union, there will be choices for all of us to make. Do we want to keep the current system of agricultural subsidy that we have under the Common Agricultural Policy? I don't think we do, because I don't think it either safeguards our environment, ensures that we have biodiversity, or provides appropriate income support for the very poorest small farmers. So what are we going to do in order to have the right environmental policy and the right agricultural policy. Similarly, when we're outside the European Union, will be outside that common foreign and security policy, but Britain will still have armed forces, a seat on the UN Security Council, we'll still be spending, and I think it's right, 0.7% of our GDP on international development. So how are we going to exercise our global power? Some of you might say it'll be diminished. Well, I disagree, but we're still going to be a significant player in hard and soft power terms. So what are we going to do? Which values are going to prevail in that debate? Similarly, when it comes to the migration policy that we'll no longer have the migration policy that we had in the European Union, which favours EU citizens over others. So how do we want to shape that migration policy? And the invitation that I make to you is that if you feel, well, you Brexit, you own it, you Brexiteers, it's your problem. That's fine. But what you may find is that the solutions that come about as a result of that don't reflect Britain in all its diversity, in all its raucous pluralism, in all its breadth. So the invitation which I issue, which is a genuine one, is I don't want to shift anyone from their allegiance. I hope people will embrace the opportunities that Brexit bring, but I recognise that I myself have strong political feelings and convictions. They don't change overnight. People's convictions here will not change overnight. But I do hope, as we develop new politics in this country, whether you're Conservative or Liberal, whether you voted Remain or Leave, that you will play a part in shaping a Britain outside the European Union that reflects the best of our past, open, liberal, tolerant, pluralist, but also can act as a model for the future, a strong partner for the European Union, standing up for progress globally, extending free trade, and making sure that democratic values, which I know everyone here by their very presence believes in, are at the heart of our future. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Michael. Our first question is this lady over here.
Hi. Okay. My name is Sharon Leclerc Spooner. I am one of those terrible experts that you so despise. I have lived in Brussels for the last 30 years. My husband and I have invested in a media which shows just how democracy works in the EU. I would like to ask what can be done in the UK to hold account politicians who mislead and misinform the UK public. The EU is one of the best democratic systems that has existed. There are elected European parliamentarians, which everybody in this room can vote for. There are governments which are elected in their member states who stand in the Council of Ministers. They are elected. Juncker is actually the result of a compromise because the UK did not want a stronger European president. How can you say that the EU is not democratic? Unacceptable.
Hands up here who voted for Jean-Claude Juncker. Well, I'm pleased that we have so many Luxembourg citizens here. The truth is that the European Union... Sorry?
All right, let him answer, please.
No, the truth is that Jean-Claude Juncker was elected by a Spitzenkandidaten system, but I can't remember anyone here having said, oh, will you want a Spitzenkandidaten system for the European Parliament? The point is...
Let him answer the question.
The point is that... I don't think... We're here living in London. London returns 10 members of the European Parliament to the European Parliament. I don't think even in... Sorry? Yes. Well, let me just return to that point. I'm making some points, which is, firstly, Jean-Claude Juncker was not directly elected. Second, there are 10 directly elected MEPs for London. I doubt if even the best informed expert in this audience would know who all 10 were. I have been directly elected as a Member of Parliament for Surrey, but more than that, to return to the point about experts. Many of us are concerned about fake news, alternative facts, unfair editing of the truth and so on. I never dismissed experts. I never said this country has had enough of experts. I pointed out in a Sky television debate that this country had had enough of experts from organisations with acronyms that had got things wrong in the past. And it was a very specific point about economic forecasting and its weakness. Sir, this has so far been a civilised debate, and I hope that we can keep it that way. And one of the things that I'm doing is correcting the record by cleaving to facts. I know that people feel strongly about these issues, but one of the things is that no matter how passionately you feel, do recognise that 52% of the country disagreed with you. And one of the things that I would say is that if you want to reason with that 52%, perhaps persuade them that their vote might be wrong, if that's what your aim is, then shouting...
Ladies and gentlemen, I'm not going to ask another question unless there is no heckling.
Sir,
okay?
Whatever the percentage is, I don't think that shouting at the back in the way that you have is precisely the way to carry on a civilised democratic conversation. Neither is pointing in that fashion.
Okay, we have to come into agreement as an audience here. Am I going to allow another question and we're not going to be heckling, or are we going to heckle and not have another question? Allow it? Okay. If your neighbour or partner starts heckling, please try and stop them. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mr. Gove, for the history lesson, but we have more pressing problems now with Brexit. And one of them is how much thought did you ever give when you embarked on your Brexit campaigning, or now, to the 3+ billion people, EU nationals, of which I am one, who's made their lives here, have contributed to this country, are even married to UK citizens, children, grandchildren, and who suddenly have felt unwanted, rejected, and with the basic human right of feeling total confidence that you can stay in your country taken away from you?
Well, I'm on the House of Commons Select Committee that's scrutinising the Brexit process. I was one of those who unanimously recommended that we grant to all EU citizens the right to remain like UK citizens. One of the unfortunate things is that there are at least 2 EU leaders who, when Theresa May sought to guarantee the rights of EU citizens here and UK citizens in the EU, said, no, we can't do that at the moment. The uncertainty that EU citizens experience is a direct result of EU politicians taking a different view.
Thank you very much, Michael Gove. Please participate on social media and in the open forum in the hours to come. Thank you.